How do you explain to a 5-year-old what peripheral vision is? Why is failure an essential component of success? Why is empathy so important in today's fast-changing society? These are 3 questions which I will try and answer. They may appear random in the course of the next 20 minutes and share with you why they're so important to me. But first, I'll try and share with you a little bit about myself, my current role, how I got to be there, and a few things maybe that I've learnt along the way. And I hope that a little of what I say may resonate with you, that may perhaps even encourage you to reflect on your own journey and the things that matter to you. I want to ask one question before I start. Is there anyone else in the room apart from me who was born either in 1969 or before 1969? I thought as much. Okay. So, I'm the granddad. Okay, so who am I? I'm going to tell you 10 short things about me and my journey. 1. I expect I don't need to point out that I'm mixed race of dual heritage. I'm the son of an English mother and a Nigerian father. And although born down south, I spent my early childhood in Scotland, living in Glasgow. Did you know that whilst the Inuit have 50 different words for snow, researchers at the University of Glasgow have discovered that the Scots have no less than 421 different words for snow? 2. I started dancing at the age of 5. My first dancing role was as a water baby. And my first starring role was, wait for it, as Little Black Sambo. It still strikes me as rather an unlikely start, not least for a mixed-race Anglo-Nigerian kid growing up in Glasgow in the 1960s, that my first taste and first love of dance was in fact classical ballet. I was the only boy. I moved to Cambridge when I was 7½. I carried on dancing and was still dancing by the time I was midway through secondary school. And in my mid-teens, I was in the rugby team, the tennis team, the athletics team, but by far the hardest of all of these, and the thing that gave me most grit, determination and joy, was doing classical ballet classes after school 5 days a week with my Russian ballet teacher. 4. I left school early at 16. I went to a local college where the timetable was flexible enough to allow me to focus more intensively on training as a dancer. At the same time as studying for my A-levels, I was undertaking private ballet classes for 4 hours a day. 5. At 18, I went to London to continue my professional training as a dancer at the London Contemporary Dance School, which is part of The Place. 6. I was lucky enough to graduate into the professional company that was also at the heart of The Place, called London Contemporary Dance Theatre. I danced for 12½ years with that company. We performed all over the UK and internationally, including at 2 Olympic Arts Festivals. Following the closure of that company, for another 12½ years, I had a freelance career, working not just as a performer, but also as a choreographer, a teacher, director. I was artistic director of Sadler's Wells Youth Dance Company and associate director of the National Youth Dance Company, Welcome. I taught at many of the leading dance schools. 7, perhaps the most unusual post I held was as dancer in residence at Queen's College, Cambridge. 8, in 2005, the year I stopped regular performing, I became a Nesta-sponsored fellow on the Claw Leadership Programme. 9, in 2007, 29 years after arriving at the Place as a first-year student, I returned to the Place as its chief executive. Full circle, full stop. 10, last year, 9 years after my swan song as a dancer, I was persuaded to go back on stage with a group of 8 other former professionals. We performed on the main stage at Sadler's Wells for 2 nights in a new work made especially for us as part of a festival called the Elixir Festival, which celebrated the older dancer. At 54, I was one of the 2 youngest dancers in the cast. The oldest was 70. The piece was later nominated for an Olivier Award, and we had 2 extra performances in London, the most recent being in April this year at the South Bank Centre. So even telling you that much about my journey, I can see, from your point of view, you might feel that there's a bit of a gap that might leave you asking, how did you go from being an artist to an arts administrator? Good question. Not only that, how did I go from someone who had very little experience in arts administration to being appointed to lead an organisation? Well, I can tell you this much. It was certainly not part of my career plan. As a teenager, I had one goal. I wanted to be a dancer. I wanted to be the best dancer that I could be and to get into a really good company and perform a lot. And I was lucky enough to do all of that. And if you had said to the 18-year-old me, as a first-year student, that one day I would return to the same organisation as its chief executive, of course I'd laughed in disbelief. And in fact, if you'd said to me even a month before I interviewed for that role, the role that I'm now in, I would have also have laughed. I sometimes think that for all the 12.5 years I was away from that organisation, having a freelance career, that I was just on a long elastic, and at some point someone just let it go and I pinged back. So, what do I do now? As you gathered, I'm chief executive of a not-for-profit charitable arts organisation, a dance organisation known as The Place, officially the Contemporary Dance Trust. The Place has been in existence for over 46 years. It officially opened in September 1969. The Place celebrated its birth with a season of performances, and the organisation began its pioneering journey to train dancers who would bring the new style of dance to the UK and to audiences up and down the country at a time when there was absolutely no audience at all in the UK for modern dance or for what later became known as contemporary dance. So, back to the present. Let me tell you a little bit about The Place today, and I'll do it really briefly, and you can ask me any questions later on. I'm happy to go into more detail. We have a 287-seat dedicated dance theatre at The Place, one of the busiest and perhaps the boldest in the UK. You'll see many artists on our stage long before they reach bigger stages such as Sadler's Wells or the Royal Opera House. We have a resident company, the Richard Alston Dance Company, which tours nationally and internationally. Richard Alston is one of the UK's most distinguished and celebrated dance artists. His 10-strong company consistently punches above its weight. They've had rave reviews in the New York Times and been nominated for and received all sorts of awards. And two of our dancers were just nominated last week in the 2015 National Dance Awards, one of them for the 4th year in succession. We have a conservatoire at The Place, the London Contemporary Dance School, where we train about 180 vocational students on both our undergraduate and postgraduate courses. Students come from across the UK and from all over the world. And to make all that tick, we have about 100 permanent staff, and we have up to about 350 part-time or casual staff, including things like guest teachers, accompanists, and technicians. Talking this morning to the very enthusiastic over 50s, I was explaining to them that a huge part of what we do at The Place is about growing dancers and dance makers, from the youngest age right through to world-class talent. And if there was a metaphor to explain what we do, I quite often find myself saying, if you want the Chelsea Flower Show, if you want the showcase, then you also need the potting sheds and the allotments. A huge part of what we do is hidden and unseen, but it has a vital role to play in the dance ecology. We like to work with others. At any one time, we probably have at least 50 partnerships in play, from one-off projects to deeply embedded long-term relationships. We're passionate about the ways in which dance can transform and enrich lives, and we've worked with partners such as Crisis and Clean Break to run projects with homeless people, with women at risk of offending, and most recently with the Neurological Hospital in Queen Square to work with recovering stroke patients. All our work aims to transform and enrich lives through dance and help build a vibrant and sustainable future for the art form. Last year, I was very honoured to be a finalist in the Black British Business Awards, and I'm not mentioning this to blow my trumpet, but more because one of the things that it provoked in my thinking at the time. In being interviewed for the awards, I was invited to think about what success meant, and I had two thoughts at the time. The first being, I found it virtually impossible to think about any personal success of my own as something separate from my day-to-day work and from all my colleagues at The Place who work every day with such enormous commitment, passion and knowledge to build a vibrant future for dance. And then the second thing was, it's perhaps all too easy to assume that success in business is about the bottom line and about profit. Well, if you're in the commercial sector, that probably is part of it. But when I think about The Place as a charitable organisation in receipt of public funding, then for me what really matters about The Place and about the work we do is actually the difference we make to individual lives. And that's something that's much harder to quantify, but it's what makes the work we do so important and so rewarding when we know we've got it right. Some lessons. Well, adversity can sometimes lead to unexpected things. And in 1994, in my mid-30s, the company that I danced for 12.5 years, that had existed for 27 years, permanently closed in very, very difficult circumstances. Well, some of you may know the Croatian proverb, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I think that was appropriate at that time. But it also made me curious. I wanted to know why this had happened. There was a huge amount of politics going on at the time, and I wanted to understand more how this decision could have been made. And those difficult circumstances also helped me find a voice. When you think of a dancer, it's all too easy to tend to think of someone who's seen but not heard. That's no longer the case, by the way. There are many choreographers making work where they expect dancers to speak, and extensively, and wear radio mics for the whole piece. But at that time, I found a voice. I became the unofficial spokesperson who, several months before the company closed, had spoken to audiences on tour from the stage to encourage them to sign a petition to try and save the company. That was before the Arts Council then warned us to continue to do so was in breach of our contract and that we would all lose our jobs. I was the dancer who spoke to the full house at Sadler's Wells from the stage immediately after the company's last ever London performance to thank them for their support. A season, by the way, for which we were later awarded an Olivier Award for Outstanding Achievement in Dance, if ever there was a golden handshake. Becoming a freelance dancer in my mid-30s was a huge career change. If nothing else, I had a pay cut, quite a huge one. It took me 10 years just as a dancer to earn the same salary just from dancing. In fact, as I was about to sign my last dancing contract in 2004-05, when I realised it was still less than I'd been earning 10 years previously, I actually wrote a letter to the company. I told them I was going to write them a letter. I had the conversation first, and I said, I'm going to write you a letter asking you to pay me £5 more than's in this contract so that I have the dignity on my last dancing contract to be paid, even if it's £1 or £2 more than I was earning 10 years ago. Of course, they obliged. So why is failure an essential component of success? Well, as a dancer, you get very used to being outside your comfort zone. And sometimes failure is very, very clear. For example, if you go to stand on one leg and you don't quite make it, you immediately reevaluate. You think, okay, what went wrong? What do I need to do? Less energy, more energy, think about something else that's going to make the difference. You try again. You might have to do it 50 times before you get it right. But eventually, whether it's standing on one leg or doing far more adventurous things, they come right, but not without a lot of discomfort along the way. Failure fear can be crippling. But my experience has taught me that the road to success is paved with many, many failures. One of our patrons of the place, Sir Ken Robinson, you may have heard him, his TED Talk from 2006 is one of the most listened to TED Talks, has said that, if you don't dare to do anything wrong, you'll never do anything new. I think he's right. One of the other questions I asked these young dancers was, in trying to get them into a spirit of creative inquiry and play, I said, when they invented the iPhone, do you think it was invented in serious mode or playful mode? And some hands immediately went up and said, oh, serious, serious. And some went, oh, no, playful, playful. And then one bright spark said, probably a bit of both. And I said, well, I agree with you. We probably can't prove it, but I think it was probably a bit of both. So if anyone asks you, what did you do with Mr. Tharp? At the end of the week, you can say, we did serious play. Dancing helped teach me what it means to be totally present in the moment. And as I hear that come off my tongue, I realise how glib that sounds, but I do mean it sincerely. The decisions we make in the moment are not always rational. You have to be able to respond quickly sometimes. You can't always sit down and figure it out, and to make the right decision under those circumstances, you have to be connected in the moment. I want to tell you a very short story about a young man. I was teaching a boys' project in Suffolk. They were performing the piece for the second time. Halfway through the piece, the second piece of music didn't come in. But if there was one thing I taught the boys in the weeks of rehearsal was they had to keep going no matter what. And they did keep going, but I still had this inner feeling that the piece was going to grind to a halt and I was nearly going to stand up and say, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we'll have to stop. But something stopped me and I carried on. At a certain point in the piece, the boys had to feed in canon, 8 counts after the other. And when it came to the last boy, instead of dancing for 8 counts, he improvised for 30 seconds. Anyone who's ever been on stage knows that 30 seconds of stage time is a huge amount of time. But he made up all these new movements I'd never seen him do. He wiggled, he jived, he went over someone, he ducked under someone, jumped over someone else, and ended up in exactly the right spot. And the piece carried on and finished, and everyone applauded. And by that time, I had cardiac arrest. I was on the floor. But the important thing is, I went back to that young man at the end of the show, and I said, do you realise how incredible what you did just was? Because if you had just stuck to the script and just done everything we'd rehearsed, the piece would have definitely ground to a halt. That young man, by the way, wanted to, I think, join the army. If you're going to be led by an officer in the army, wouldn't you want to be led by an officer who, in the moment, will go, that's what we do, and not think, oh, hang on a minute, folks, I'm not quite sure here. So having intuition and instinct can be incredibly important. And for me, instinct is about the capacity to go beyond what one has been taught. It's the ability to leap beyond formal learning and arrive at a spontaneous and creative solution. So why is empathy so important in today's fast-changing society? Empathy for me is not just about having empathy for someone else's ideas and feelings. As a dancer, empathy is also physical. It's spatial. It's learning to habit and coexist with someone in the space and in a finely tuned way. Empathy for me also means recognize there's a difference between information and knowledge, especially when that knowledge is embodied in what you do and who you are. And I think some of the most important conversations that need to happen are across sectors. We need people in society who are bridge builders. Otherwise, knowledge will, as Aldous Huxley used to suggest, will stay in its monastic cells. I believe we're both mind and matter, and that what matters is that we recognise fully the interplay between the two, because this helps define us as human beings. I believe that dance and movement have a fundamental role to play alongside all the other arts in the holistic education and development of young people. It has a huge role to play in helping those young people realise their fullest potential. And my own experience of working in schools over many years demonstrated repeatedly how a well-delivered dance program can have a powerful transformational effect on the young participants. But equally, it can cause the teachers and the people who should know those young people best to re-evaluate their own perceptions of the potential of those same young people. How many times did teachers say, that one's a troublemaker, that one's an underachiever, and how many times were they proved wrong at the end of a dance project? So to close, in my role, one of the biggest questions and the hardest question for me to answer is, how do I know I've made a difference? One answer to that might be when other people start saying the things that you once said, or embodying the behaviours you encouraged as though they were their own. The advice I received from a mentor once was, don't be afraid of saying the same thing many, many times, even to the extent that you'll be sick of hearing yourself saying it, because perhaps it's only at that point that others will begin to take it on board, and eventually it will come back to you. The final three things, my tips if you like. Suggestions, humbly offered. If you want to achieve success, then firstly, define success on your own terms. Try not to live someone else's measure of success, but what success means to you. And B, give yourself permission to fail along the way. Second thing, practice daily what it means to you to be totally present and in the moment. That may be different to each and every one of us, whatever we do in our daily lives. But think about what that might mean. And the final sentence I'll give to someone much older or long gone and wiser than me, called Seneca. He said, it's not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It's because we do not dare that they are difficult. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and watch the rest of our talks below.